Foreword from the author. Why have I written this story? I can't answer that with certainty, other than to say that some stories have to be written. The need to tell stories, as well as the desire to listen to them, are probably both impulses fundamental to our human nature. Unfortunately, some tales are more enjoyable to tell than to hear. I hope that is not the case with this one. But it doesn't really matter, because it's just a story that got stuck in my head, and for the better part of 3 weeks in September of 2020, in the middle of a pandemic, it was all I could think about. It was something I had to write. I am reasonably sure that all the events in this book are true. They must have happened to someone at some time and in some place. The exact sequence may have been different, and certainly the names of people and places have been changed. Not to protect them as much as to protect me. I apologize to the reader in advance for the various detours this narrative takes from time to time, but in addition to being about a murder, this book is also about a house, a lake, a small town, a hotel, a restaurant, fathers, daughters, the state of Kansas, a virus, and dreams. The Lakehouse, Chapter 1, Bones. I suppose you could never really know how you might react when you discovered a dead body, or in my case, a dead person's bones in your backyard. I was a bit surprised that more than anything what I felt was fascination, not revulsion or disgust, or even fear. Those are the reactions you might expect to have when you find yourself in the situation such as I did on the day after Labor Day, 2020, at the Lakehouse in Morgan, Kansas. I have come to realize as I approach my 69th year that there are two parts of my temperament that seem to be at odds: curiosity and a short attention span. Things capture my attention easily and I plunge into them with intensity. But often something new comes along and I tend quickly to abandon the thing that last sparked my interest. For example, right now I'm writing a crime novel. Yes, it's a crime novel, and for the past month, I wake up thinking about nothing else and write most of the day. I only hope I can finish this project before something new distracts me. It's likely something will, but for now, writing The Lakehouse consumes my attention. I don't think my specific condition has a name. The experts these days have labels and acronyms for a variety of ailments of attention, as they might be called. ADHD, or Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, is one of them. I don't think that fits my condition. Perhaps ADD/RT is a more apt description, but I'm just guessing because I have no idea what ADD/RT is. Suffice it to say that I can get intensely drawn into things for periods of time and then easily forget about them, never to return. Witness the 5 or maybe 7 book projects living on various hard drives of the 4 Mac computers inside our house and the one in storage. Dozens, who knows, maybe more, of unfinished jazz compositions, charts as we call them in my line of work, in file cabinets in our garage. There they wait only to eventually be a burden to my children when I am gone. These curious pathologies are not new. They go way back. Even to the sailboat I started building in high school. Turns out my parents, once I began college, sold the parts at a yard sale. I still think about the boat that wasn't, but only because they had disposed of it prematurely. Oh, Mike, we meant to tell you, We sold that wood in the garage. Was that okay? My boat? No, Mom and Dad, not okay. I was going to finish that someday. That was never likely, and as a point of fact, I had completely forgotten about her. That is the appropriate way to refer to a vessel, I am told, until they brought it up. Oh, by the way, they sold my BB gun at the same time. Never really forgave them for that. So as I stared at the skeletonized hand protruding from the dirt wall at the edge of the hole that Red and Jimmy had just begun digging in the back of the Lakehouse, I was fascinated. It seemed rather small. The ends of the fingers seemed to be absent, but it was hard to tell because it could have been that the hand was clenched in a fist. Or maybe it had been holding something. Who knows? I was cleaning in the TV room when I heard Jimmy yell, "Wait!" Then the motor of the backhoe cut off. After a pause and some murmured conversation, which I couldn't quite make out, Jimmy stuck his head in the back door. "Mr. Newman, you need to come out here." Sparks flew out of the outlet when I unplugged the vacuum, and I thought, this old wiring really sucks. It's going to kill me one of these days. When I came out the back door off the kitchen, Red, who had been operating the backhoe, was bent at the waist with his hands on his knees, peering intently into the hole. It was 4 feet long, 2 feet wide, and 2 feet deep, and had been dug after removing a portion of the concrete slab that ran across the back of the house. All of this work was to replace a damaged sewer line at 3 Lakeview Drive. Jimmy was on his knees, his head half visible as he craned his neck to inspect the bones. He glanced at me, stood up quickly, turned to Red for a moment, then back to me with an expression that was 1/3 smile, 1/3 question, and 1/3 fear. His eyebrows raised and his head cocked to the side in an expression that seemed to say, "What do you think?" I looked into the hole as I moved closer. Eventually, I found myself reaching into the trench to touch the hand. I thought better of it and pulled back. We stood together behind the house beside the backhoe without exchanging a word for what seemed like a minute or two. "Maybe it's a dog," Red said. "Dude, that's a dude," Jimmy whispered slowly. He turned to me. "Mr. Newman, what do we do?" My first inclination, being the modern man that I am, was to get my computer and Google it. I hesitated just long enough for Red to make the suggestion that should have been immediately obvious to all three of us. "We need to call the sheriff." Only later, after the sheriff had arrived, did I actually Google the question, what to do when you find bones. Turns out that finding bones in your garden or in your yard is a fairly common search item in landscaping sites. As amazing as it might seem, many states still permit burials on private property. "Hey, honey, let's save some money and plant Grandma out by the compost pit." Yikes. And different states have different laws about reporting human remains. Alabama has no requirement to report human bones at all. Indiana requires that persons contact the Division of Historic Preservation and Archaeology. In Washington state, local law enforcement must be contacted, and a coroner will determine if the remains are of forensic value. That sounds cool, does it not? Forensic value. Note, if you do go down this rabbit hole, be prepared for sites that sell human bones, including skulls. BoneMerchant.com, located in California, of course, will sell you a human skull for $2,000, but they cannot ship to Georgia, Tennessee, or Louisiana. Go figure. Maybe those states don't want no Yankee bones? Turns out that the state of Kansas is a bit taciturn on their guidelines. I couldn't find anything, but it didn't matter because I assumed the sheriff would know what to do. Red and Jimmy had begun working on the sewer line project around 8:30 in the morning. The bones were discovered around 8:45 after cutting the concrete, positioning the backhoe, and taking out the first buckets of dirt. The sheriff, Jeffrey Stern, didn't arrive till 10 a.m. Red, Jimmy, and I waited in the shade of the pear tree on 3 camp chairs I found in the house. We keep those in a closet for our yearly outing to the Old Timers' Day parade. It felt like we were keeping some good social distance. At least I was. Red and Jimmy didn't seem to care all that much. As mentioned, it was the day after Labor Day, and the summer heat was still making its presence known. The sky was cloudless, and there was hardly a breeze. It was pleasant in the shade of the tree, and we tried to make small talk as best we could. This is hard to do with the bones of a dead man 15 feet away. Bones of a dead man. Or would it be better to say a dead man's bones? I will need to choose one or the other if I ever finish this book and try to edit that sentence. The conversation quickly dwindled into an uncomfortable silence. Politics is off the table these days unless you're absolutely sure you're within your tribe. The sewer project was on hold for certain, and any progress on what to do with the dead man's bones, I'm going with that, could not be made until the sheriff arrived. I decided to tick a few things off my to-do list. I got out my phone and tapped in the number. "You've reached Penny's Concrete. Leave a message." The voice was gruff. Didn't sound like Penny to me. Why doesn't anyone answer a phone in this town, I thought. I left my message. "My name is Michael Newman. My number is 940-555-2020. I left plenty of pauses in case someone was writing it down. I was out last week, you might remember, but I didn't really know what I needed. I want to get an estimate on a load of ready mix and perhaps line up a delivery. So if you can call back, I would really appreciate it so we can get a quote. Thanks." I read my number again slowly, then hung up. Ready mix, in case you don't know, is a technical term for a mix of Portland cement, water, and aggregate that is used in construction projects. "Sorry it took me so long to get here," the sheriff said as he stood next to us and eyed the opening in the back of the house. Red, Jimmy, and I were now wearing the mask we had forgotten about in the excitement of finding a corpse, or to be exact, a skeleton. Stern fished in his pocket for his mask when he saw ours. He pulled it out, didn't put it on, but rather moved toward the hole, moving his head side to side to get a better look. He turned back to us. "What do you think we got here?" "It ain't a dog or a coyote. Looks human to me," Jimmy said as he stood up and moved next to the sheriff. "Okay, can we move a bit more dirt and get a better idea? Looks like it's just below the concrete. Why don't we try to lift a bit more of the slab to see how much we have? Might just be a hand." The sheriff looked at Red and tipped his head in the direction of the backhoe. Stern began putting on latex gloves and turned to Jimmy. "You got a small knife, screwdriver, or a wire brush?" Jimmy pulled out a pocket knife. "This work?" "Not really." The sheriff turned to me. "You the owner?" I nodded. "What you got in the house?" "I'll look." I offered my hand before remembering about social distancing, then pulled it back. "My name's Newman, Michael Newman," I said. "Jeffrey Stern, County Sheriff. Sorry about the circumstances." He apologized while pointing with his thumb toward the hole, looking a bit like a man trying to hitch a ride. Then pointing to me with his index finger, "You full-time at the lake?" "No, we live in Texas. This is our—" I paused since I hadn't really figured out what 3 Lakeview Drive was for us. "Vacation home," I said with hesitation as I entered the back door and went to the kitchen. I returned shortly with an assortment of utensils that I thought might work. Stern took them all, laid them on the ground next to the hole, and then stepped carefully into the trench, resting his backside on the ledge opposite the bony hand. His head went from side to side, then up and down as he surveyed the remains. He reached for the brush I had used to clean the breakfast dishes. Note to self, I thought, get a new dishwashing brush at the dollar store later. After delicately removing a bit of dirt from around the hand, he got out of the hole. "Red, can you use your backhoe to lift up the concrete just a bit?" The slab ran along the side of the TV room from the back door of the kitchen about 25 feet south to north. It ran west from the house about 6 feet in width. The hand, or fist, was pointing south toward the back door. If an entire body was underneath that slab, its feet were pointing north. Jeffrey Stern was in his first term as sheriff of Morgan County, having been elected in 2018. He had grown up in the county and enlisted in the military right after high school. After 2 hitches in the Army that included 2 tours in Afghanistan, he earned a BA at the University of Texas. When his family needed help with the farm, he moved back in 2016. 2 years later, he ran against a 3-term incumbent, traveling to every small town in the county, shaking hands and listening. He won by a large margin, and while he wasn't the youngest sheriff in the state, he, at 34, was younger than most. Though not necessarily handsome by Hollywood standards, he was good-looking. He had the well-groomed look of an ex-military man and the air of one who had been athletic in his youth. A slight bit of extra weight around the middle hinted at the reality that middle age was beginning to catch up with Sheriff Jeffrey Stern. That said, his movements were quick and decisive. I was sure that he could run a man down on foot if he needed. In high school, he had excelled athletically and scholastically. In fact, he had been the salutatorian of his class. A farm kid, he had attended a consolidated school built between 3 small towns. In 1957, nobody in Hurley, White City, or Willard minded giving up their high school, but they didn't want their children going to a different town to get learned. So, as was the customary solution throughout the Midwest at the time, a school was constructed in a wheat field, USD 321, Central High School. As Stern was to confide in me in the coming weeks, he had received a first-rate education at Central and loved being back in Morgan County. I had gotten a bit nervous waiting for Stern to show, and many thoughts ran through my head. Whose bones are those under the concrete? Why was he or she there? Red and Jimmy were restless until I assured them that I would pay them for the day. Now that the sheriff was here, we had some direction. Hopefully, he had a plan, because I sure didn't. "Be careful," he instructed Red. "Just try to find the edge of the concrete and pry it up." Stern backed out of the trench as the ground shifted a bit and the teeth of the bucket engaged the lip of the slab. "Okay, now up just a bit. Easy. Stop." The concrete was lifted about 5 inches, so you could see a break between the slab and the earth below it. "Red, you got a flashlight?" Stern yelled over the idling of the engine. Jimmy went to the backhoe, and Red handed him a torch, as they say in England. Stern bent down and directed the light into the gap. Damn. Then a pause. "Okay, can you just keep that in place, Red?" Turning to me. "Mr. Newcomb, you got something like a cement block that we can wedge in there to hold up the slab?" "It's Newman, and yes, I have some flagstone in the garage." I ran around the back of the garage and picked out a stone about the size of a concrete block, but only got 2 steps before I decided it was a bit too heavy. Gotta watch the back, I thought. I found a smaller one and ran, a bit too quickly for my age, to the hole. I was out of breath. I didn't know if it was from the running or the excitement of the situation. As the sheriff put the stone between the lip of the sod and the edge of the slab, I tried to see what it was that he had seen. I came up behind him as he shone the light on the bones once again. I saw the skull, and for the first time that day I got a chill. It was facing to the west in the direction of the arm that was attached loosely to the hand that seemed to be clenched. Stern could see the situation better than me, and I heard him whisper, "That's a bullet hole, damn it." He stood up quickly and turned around, startling both of us. "Okay, let me think." There was a pause. "Red, you, Jimmy, you can go if you want. I'll need a statement, but I know how to find you." He turned to me. "Mr. Newman," I said, helping him out. "Okay, Mr. Newman, we need to keep everyone and everything like animals away from this spot. Can we do that?" "Sure thing." I looked at the hole again. "Okay." He looked down at the ground, his head tilted to one side. He was thinking. He took off his latex gloves, then looked at me. "Let me go to the car and make some calls." After getting a flashlight from the kitchen, I bent down and looked carefully into the space between the slab and the dirt. I could see that what appeared to be the victim, shall we start calling him that, the victim, was on his or her back, with the left arm raised over the head so that the left hand was a few inches to the south of the skull. The head was turned to the left, and there, just above the left eye, was a small hole. I remembered what Stern had whispered. "That's a bullet hole." I got another chill. "Mr. Newman," he yelled as he came around the garage, "do not touch anything." And yes, it did sound like each one of those words started with a capital letter. He began putting up the yellow tape you see on TV. "Police line, do not cross." Shaking a bit, I went into the kitchen and put my cold cup of coffee into the microwave. A small spark flew out of the socket when I hit the start button. Chapter 2, 3 Lakeview Drive. Ever in search of a new project to which I can direct my intense attention, only to eventually abandon it in time, I became obsessed with 3 Lakeview Drive in the fall of 2019. August 2019 was the official date of my retirement from my teaching job in Denton, Texas. The details of my work, which had occupied me for more than 40 years, is of little significance for the purpose of this story. And all you really need to know is that I taught music, wrote some books about music, and performed it whenever someone asked me to. I think I've only turned down a handful of gigs my whole life. The one that sticks out is a Christmas parade at a local mall. The first call came from the leader and sounded fun. "Want to play some brass quintet Christmas music at the mall in Louisville?" I agreed. "Great, love to play some brass quintet music." The bread was good too. On a Saturday morning, what else would I be doing? A week later, the leader called back. "I'll drop off the music. It needs to be memorized since we are leading the parade." Okay, I agreed, assuming it wouldn't be that hard, and the parade would be short. A week after that, "What size tights do you wear?" "Huh?" I was getting worried now. "Yeah, we are going to be dressed like Santa's elves and marching in front of his sleigh." I tried to fake my way out of it at first, pretending I'd forgotten about another appointment. "You know, man, I totally forgot that Then I said to myself, screw it, just tell him the truth. So I backed out. "Man, I can't do that. Tights, really? Probably green, right?" He totally understood, and I can proudly say that I had drawn a line in the sand, and it was, I will not wear tights and play my trumpet at the same time. An artist has to have principles, does he not? Sorry, took a detour on that one, didn't I? Back to the story. The house at 3 Lakeview Drive is my wife's girlhood home. Girlhood sounds a bit strange, doesn't it? Perhaps childhood is better? Once again, decisions to be made at another date when I edit this thing, if I ever get that far. Back to 3 Lakeview Drive. My wife's father, Wallace Becker, the owner and editor of the Morgan County Ledger, and my mother-in-law, Maxine, purchased the property from A.J. Bruner, a quarry owner, in 1949. It was one of the first homes built at Morgan County Lake. We estimate around 1944. The original structure was a cabin, 22 feet by 22 feet, with a well in a well pit just outside its northwest corner. The well provided running water to the kitchen. At some point, an outhouse was made obsolete when a bedroom, bathroom, and garage were added on the north side of the cabin. The bathroom contained a sink and a commode. Today, realtors refer to it as a half bath. I have been informed by Jean, my wife, that they called it the little bath. That part of the house was constructed with cement blocks and added before Wallace and Maxine moved in. Gradually, as the family grew, new bedrooms and a full bath were added so that by 1963, the year I moved to town, the property included 4 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a living room, dining area, music room, and a 2-car garage. At that time, the old garage became the master bedroom. Later on, when the children had moved out, it became the TV room. The TV room was the room I preferred to stay in when working at the house, obviously because of the TV. All of the renovations since 1949 were designed by my wife's brilliant father, Wallace, or Wally as his friends called him, who was a Renaissance man of sorts and passed away in 1967 before I had a chance to know him. Maxine remarried, moved to Texas in 2001, and gave the house to her children. For about 20 years, my wife and her 4 brothers owned the Lakehouse as a limited partnership and enjoyed the use of the home once or twice a year for family reunions. In the last few years, a consensus began to emerge in the partnership that the property should be sold. I, sensing that Jean would never bear the possibility of strangers owning her home, floated the idea that she and I purchase it from her brothers. In November, the partnership was dissolved, and the house became ours, and I began waking up at 4:30 in the morning thinking about 3 Lakeview Drive. You must understand that I love the home. I have nothing but fond memories of the many hours spent at the lake during the time in high school when Jean and I dated. First of all, number 3 sits on the highest part of Lakeview Drive and has a great view of the swimming beach, or at least it did before the campers, RVs, and mobile homes filled up the lot across the street. You can still see the water in the first cove from the house, and in the winter, when the leaves have fallen, you can see all the way to the other side of the lake. Morgan County Lake is small, built by the Civilian Conservation Corps, or CCC, in 1937, and, unlike the huge and impersonal Corps of Engineer lakes built in the 1950s, there are homes and boat docks all around the perimeter. It's cute and picturesque in its own modest Midwest way. For nearly 5 decades, one of the distinctive landmarks at the Morgan County Lake was the Kingfisher Inn. I am sad to say it is gone. Probably built around the same time as the cabin at 3 Lakeview, the Kingfisher was for many the culinary bright spot in the county. It's set at the corner of Lakeview Drive and what we've always called the Airport Road. Inside and out, it had the look and feel of a boathouse, the kind you might imagine at Cape Cod, or at least what a Kansan who had never been within 500 miles of an ocean might think of as a boathouse on Cape Cod. At the entrance, on the southeast corner, you were greeted with a cashier's counter on the right, and on the left a long bench where you could sit and wait for your table. The restaurant was only open from Thursday through Sunday, and business was always great. There was usually a line, and often it went out the door. On the wall to the right of the counter, 6 deck cleats from a sailboat were mounted in a line at eye level and served as a coat rack. Just inside the dining room, booths lined the east and north walls. Completely made of wood and with tall backs, the booths provided some semblance of private dining and a coziness that I found appealing. The rest of the room was filled with wood tables. 2 long ones on the west wall could be put together to accommodate large parties. The walls were covered with mounted fish, mostly freshwater, trout, bass, and carp. On the back wall was a large sailfish with a 1-foot snout and a fin reaching almost to the ceiling. We were reasonably certain that that fish had not come out of the county lake. Along with the mounted fish were pictures of classic motorboats, water skiers, and newspaper clippings of anglers proudly displaying 50-pound catfish. The cooking was excellent, and as you might guess, seafood, or to be more exact, lake food, was the specialty. In particular, catfish. I actually preferred their fried chicken. The salad bar highlight was the pickled beets. When we visited, Jean always talked the owner into selling her a jar to take back to Texas. The Kingfisher, although not fancy by current standards, in its day was the go-to place for special occasions, birthdays, holidays, graduations, etc. For my family, eating out anywhere was a treat, but dining at the Kingfisher was special. As a young person, it seemed to me rather exotic. That may have been in large part because of its rumored past. There were stories that at one time the Kingfisher had been a speakeasy of sorts. The old-timers in town spoke of the 40s and 50s when underworld types would arrive in their big black cars from Kansas City and Wichita and stay at the restaurant until the wee hours. It was assumed they were doing far more than having some catfish. More than once I heard about the slot machines in the upstairs room and the all-night poker games. You have to understand that Kansas has always included county abbreviations on their car tags, so you could tell if you saw a plate with SG, it was from Sedgwick County, that's Wichita. JO was Johnson County, Kansas City. There were even Missouri plates from time to time. Those were probably Pendergast men, as the oldsters used to call them. Tom Pendergast was the undisputed kingpin of the corrupt political machine which controlled Jackson County, Missouri, from the mid-20s into the 40s. He built alliances with crime families in Kansas City proper, but also extended his influence into cities in neighboring states like Omaha, Nebraska, and Wichita, Kansas. My best friend Donnie told me once that his father, who had worked as a busboy at the Kingfisher in the late 40s, remembered mob bosses meeting at the Kingfisher for late-night meals, card games, and slots. They also had their women with them. But Donnie had nothing but crazy stories, so I never really believed him. The restaurant went out of business during the downturn in the economy around 2008. Someone bought the property and completely rebuilt it into a home. It's lovely, but it only makes me sad when I pass it. I miss the whimsical, unpretentious charm that the Kingfisher and its odd collection of clientele added to the lake. But even with the Kingfisher gone, the Morgan County Lake is a great spot. There, the nights are extremely quiet, and the sky has more stars than city folk can imagine. It's 6 hours north of the heat of Texas, and the air seems not just cooler, but somehow different. When we travel back and turn north off the main highway for the last 10-mile stretch into Morgan, Jean opens up all the windows in the car, breathes in, and asks, "Do you smell that?" For her, it's rhetorical, and she quickly adds, "That's Kansas." "Smells like dirt to me," I usually answer. So I love everything about being an owner of 3 Lakeview Drive. Please remember that. But there are some challenges. It's hard to know where to start, and that, in essence, is what found me wide awake some mornings at 4:30. Where to start? It seemed the most logical place was the half bath, or little bath, which is why I'm writing this story. As mentioned before, the small room with only a sink and a commode was probably what first replaced the outhouse. I'm only guessing, but I think the little bath has been unusable for 10 or maybe 15 years. The drain slowed, then stopped. The old-fashioned clay pipe was eventually completely blocked by tree roots. Roto-Rooter gave up in despair and didn't even bother to send us a bill. They felt so sorry for us. Masking tape was covered over the fixtures lest someone make the mistake of turning on the water or worse, using the toilet. Only a few years ago, out of curiosity, did Jean open the door to find, growing out from under the porcelain commode, the fine fingers of tree roots. It looked a bit like someone had put the toilet on top of someone's hair or toupee. It was very creepy. Reminiscent of Weeds by Stephen King, a story about a farmer who is slowly turning into a plant. For a few years, I fully expected to return to the house after months away to find that roots had invaded the music room or the kitchen. It didn't happen, and after a time, everyone simply forgot about the little bath. So the little bath became the first project to tackle. It was slated for early spring of 2020, but the COVID-19 situation put everything on hold. Finally, in August, I began traveling to Kansas and meeting with contractors to get the small and forgotten lavatory operable. All the plumbers agreed. You need to pull the fixtures, cut the floor, and see where the problem is. It would no doubt include removing or at least cutting into the slab outside the wall adjacent to the little bath. It was a big project and it was going to cost some money, but we were committed to it, as having an additional facility would make family reunions much more enjoyable. As Labor Day approached, we decided it was time to do it. Next on the list was the general problem that the house was settling. Like an older person who has spent a bit too much time sitting in a chair, 3 Lakeview Drive was slumping. Most notable was a 3-inch drop from the door of the music room to the kitchen sink just 8 feet away. The estimates from foundation firms ranged from an easy $2,500 fixed to a complete gut of the kitchen, removing the floor, replacing joists, and jacking the whole thing up. The gentleman from that company wouldn't even guess as to the expense. For now, we have decided that we will live with the lurching sensation of being propelled by gravity into the kitchen each morning on the way to our first cup of coffee. Let's think of it as a ride in an amusement park, Jean says. Concrete was a big issue, as you know, if you've read this far. Not just in the back where the slab was, but in the front as well. The driveway, in addition to having numerous cracks that proved to be wonderful beds for weeds, was now sloping into the garage rather than away from it. Water collects into the garage easily in muddy puddles that take days to dry out. The sidewalk from the driveway to the front door has sometime in the last 10 years been heaved up about 6 inches by the massive tree roots of a very healthy maple tree that was planted a bit too close to the house and the sidewalk. We were going to need concrete and a lot of it. Ironic that the day had started out by removing concrete, and now I wanted to add more. I had been to the local concrete plant the week before, Penny's Concrete, just north of town on Highway 77. Actually met Penny. Now you would think that a woman named Penny would be good-natured and friendly. As a matter of fact, Penny is an English name meaning weaver. According to babynames.com, Penny reached its popularity around 1950. I had known a few Pennies in my time, and they had all been pleasant. This one, not so much. Jimmy was going to be busy with the second bath for a while, so I had done some research and considered renting a concrete mixer and doing the sidewalk driveway job myself. After considerable Googling, I concluded that I needed to order some ready mix. The proposition was somewhat mysterious. I needed help, and I was sure Sweet Penny at Penny's Concrete could help me out. It wasn't what I expected. What you need? I was only 2 feet from the door and still 8 feet from the small woman behind the counter when she accosted me in a voice so flat it seemed devoid of gender. Surprised, I tried to answer. Not sure. I'm considering pouring a new driveway and a sidewalk. I looked around to see if there were any price lists or brochures on the counter. The counter was bare except for a small plastic holder of business cards. Behind the woman, who I assume was Penny, there was a large white erase board marked with black electrician's tape in a grid that was attempting to imitate a calendar. The dates had been entered with markers over what looked like the smeared remains of a decade of writing. Dimensions? She asked. Oh, let me see. I should have been prepared for that. Driveway, 20 by 20, sidewalk, maybe 2 feet by 20. It's hard to tell. She stared back at me blankly in a look that I interpreted as disdain for an amateur like me who was now wasting her time. Thickness? Wow, I don't know. What's recommended? I needed Penny's help. Sir, I sell concrete. And then, without affect, she rattled off what sounded like a pre-recorded message. $90 a yard, $60 delivery fee within 20-mile radius, $10 per mile outside that, and a 20% surcharge for Saturdays. Payment in advance is required. We take cash or check, no credit cards, no PayPal, no Bitcoin. I think the Bitcoin part was for humor. She stared at me. Maybe you should come back when you have a more exact idea of what you need. Where's my Coca-Cola? A husky voice spoke from the back office. I could see the back of an old man slumped in a wheelchair next to a desk. That was the voice I'd heard on the answering machine on the day after Labor Day while sitting 15 feet from a dead man's bones. Yes, I'm definitely going with that phrase, dead man's bones. Just a minute, Daddy, she said with a slight bit of sweetness, then turning back to me. Here's a card with our number. Like I said, call or come back when you have a better idea. We'll fix you up. Her voice rose slightly for those last 4 words, I suppose in an attempt to sound cheerful. As I left, I said to myself, yes, we're going to need concrete and Penny is going to fix us up. Next on the list, wiring. Oh yeah, wiring in the house was an issue. Most of the outlets are ungrounded, which is not up to code. More than once sparks flew out of an outlet when plugging in a vacuum or hairdryer. Each time I thought, that's not right, is it? The TV room, the former master bedroom, which had been the original garage, has only 2 electrical outlets, and the one by the TV is always overpopulated in terms of cords. There are at most times 5 or 6 connecting the old Magnavox TV, a VCR, a cable box, a DVD player, and a table lamp. An internet modem and router have been added recently, and all the plugs feed into 2 expanders which feed into the outlet, which is just under the window overlooking the slab. If you squint your eyes, it looks like the wall is growing dreadlocks. Every time I glanced at that area, I would think, that ain't right. Need to figure out something better there. The bright spot in the wiring situation is that at some point the power to the utility room was grounded and fused. That is the room that sits over the well pit, the scene of my greatest triumph. Let me explain. As mentioned before, the original cabin had a water well in a cement well pit, 6 foot by 6 foot square and 6 feet deep, just outside the house. Not a problem, you might say, except that the additions to the house were built over the top of that pit. So the utility closet, which houses the water heater and furnace, sat until recently directly above 3 or 4 feet of standing water in the well pit. No one in the family, not even Maxine, can ever remember the pit not having water in it. There is a trap door in the floor with a grate so you can see into the pit. It was always a bit of a shock when looking down through the grate to be greeted with the perfect reflection of your own face looking back at you. The water we assumed was either well water or groundwater. It was always smooth on its surface, but mysterious as to what lay submerged below. It was certainly putting excess moisture into the house and contributing to some mustiness. Not good. That water had to go. I must tell you that until recently I was confused as to the difference between the well and the well pit. When I first looked through the grate at the standing water and asked one of Jean's brothers, "Where's that water coming from?" it was explained as, "That's water from the well." I then asked, "How deep is that well?" "Not sure, 20 feet, maybe more like 50. They, referring to the 6-inch metal well pipe that was not visible to me due to the standing water. Me, thinking that the entire well pit, 6 feet across, descended deep into the bowels of the earth below 3 Lakeview Drive. It seemed extremely dangerous and creepy. Even as late as mid-August of this year, as I had plumbers examine the well and the well pit, the actual depth of the water was unknown to me. Yet again, another thing that kept me awake at 4:30 in the morning. Here's a fun fact. There are over 1 million water wells in Texas. At first, you might think that Kansas doesn't measure up since, according to the groundwater database at KU, the Jayhawk State has only 270,000. But if you consider that the population of Texas is 25.1 million and the population of Kansas is 2.7 million, then use your excellent skills learned in Mr. Regeer's Morgan High School math class, you will discern that Texas has 1 water well for every 25 citizens, while Kansas has 1 water well for every 10 citizens. Take that, Texas. Put it in your pipe and smoke it. Anyway, that's what you can discover when you Google capping a water well. I quickly learned from the DIY gurus on YouTube that my solution was twofold. First, bump out the standing water, then cap the well. Step 1 would be accomplished with a sump pump. An early trip to August was spent installing a pump, cutting through the outside siding, threading a plastic corrugated hose into the backyard. Sounds easy until you understand that the pit is 6 feet deep and it had at least 3 feet of water. I set the pump into a Home Depot bucket, drilled holes in the bottom, attached a rope to the bucket, and lowered it into the water. First attempts were fraught with problems. The bucket floated, tipped to the side, and for a minute it looked like I'd be wading into 70 years of creepy standing water to retrieve my $125 sump pump. Not my idea of fun. More holes in the bucket and a few flagstones from the garage stuck in its bottom for weight proved to be the perfect solution. I cannot explain the satisfaction I felt as I watched the well water pour out of the hose in the backyard. The sump worked, but could only do so much. I just could not get that 1.5 inches of water out. I returned a week later with a wet-dry vacuum, or vac, as they say, one of the true marvels of modern machinery, and got the water level down till all that was left was a dark, muddy slime. At least there were no critters or snakes that I could see at that point. Returning 2 weeks after that to meet with Jimmy and begin the renovation of the little bath, I was pleased beyond measure to find the well pit bone dry. The house felt drier, or at least I thought it did. I even brought Jimmy and Red to the utility room and had them look into the trap door just to share my triumph. I took video to send to my in-laws and gave my wife and mother-in-law, Maxine, a FaceTime tour on our iPhones. Maxine had been living with us since the COVID lockdown, and we loved having her. In mid-March, her very nice retirement facility restricted visitors, ceased food service in the dining room, and more importantly to Maxine, shut down Friday afternoon bingo. She was bored, and we couldn't visit. It was a no-brainer to move her in with us. It's been a bright spot in a dark time. The other bright spot was our grandson, Connor. He was born last October, and we had visited him often in Austin until the virus hit. Now we could only Zoom 3 times a week. I will not go on and on about my grandson like some grandparents do. As a matter of fact, I'm going to do a word count on this paragraph and set the limit at 250, just as a precaution. Until I had a grandson, I didn't realize how crazy in love you could be with the child of your child. I get it now, and I feel bad for any derisive thoughts I might have had when other grandparents had gone on a bit too long about theirs. Like I say, I get it now. No child can be cuter or brighter than your grandchild. Sometimes we Zoom during his breakfast. With avocado half in and out of his mouth, running down his chin, I will turn to Jean and say, "Look, honey, he's a genius. He's actually picking up the avocado and eating with his fingers." Like I said, grandkids are the best. 181 words. See, I promised. Which brings me to a small related project, Connor's stool. We had retrieved a small weather-worn stool from Maxine's balcony that I planned to strip, sand, refinish, and decorate for Connor for his first birthday in October. It was very cute. How can a stool be cute, you ask? Probably the size of it. It was just right for him. It was a good project to have in those moments when I lacked the energy to tackle more challenging ones, or when I was waiting for someone to call back with a quote. There are other projects on the horizon: a new roof, walk-in shower in the full bath, landscaping to control drainage, and tree removal, but the big concern on the Tuesday after Labor Day of 2020 was cutting through the concrete slab and creating a new sewer line for the little bath. Slab. What a strange word. Chapter 3, Calling Home. Jimmy Davis, the man I hired to restore the little bath, was somewhat new to Morgan. He had grown up in California, the son of an army man. I am a bit uncertain, but I think that the father had connections to Morgan, and Jimmy had moved his family, wife and 2 kids, to Kansas about 5 years ago. He was a hard worker and a very nice man. Since he was self-employed and had little overhead, his quote for the work was 30% less than the other more established plumbers in town. Not only that, but he agreed to do the entire job, from running new sewer lines, plumbing the bath, replacing the floor and walls, and doing the finish work of tiling. Once it was started, I could close my eyes and visualize the whole finished project, and me sitting on my new porcelain throne, reading the paper, taking my time, because I knew no matter how many were staying at the house, I really wasn't holding anyone up. "Try the other one," I would yell. A man's not the king of his castle if he can't take his time in the bathroom. At my age, it was a requisite part of a healthy lifestyle. I had earned a second bath. So I was excited when Red arrived with the backhoe and the process of uncovering the mystery of the drains would be revealed. Little did I realize all the strange twists and turns the next few days and weeks would take. Sheriff Stern had finished putting up the yellow police tape when I heard him knock on the kitchen window. I was nursing my coffee and trying to decide whether to call Jean or not. She and Maxine were curious about the project and would be wondering how it was going. I was at a loss as to what I would or could tell them, and so I was relieved to see the sheriff. He now had a mask on and asked to come in. I stood by the stove, and he stayed about 8 feet back just inside the door. I thought to myself, my, what a strange time we are living in, when each interaction with a new human brings up the thought, are you the one that's going to kill me? Okay, here's the plan. My deputy is on the way out here. He'll need to take a statement and... I interrupted. There really isn't much to say. We dug, we found bones, we called you. I know. It's just a formality in a way, but we will need to know more about the property, how long you've been here, that kind of stuff. He sighed. So as I was saying, my deputy will take the statement. Be as complete as you can. But more importantly, the KBI will be sending a man from the Great Bend office, maybe 2. The county coroner will also be out. KBI may be requesting help from the archaeological department at KU or K-State, not sure which, maybe both. I guess they often bring them in to help with this kind of stuff. That's all I can be sure of for now. Don't go anywhere without telling us, okay? Sheriff, I'm not going anywhere. I have nothing planned, really. If I did, it had left my mind for now. I stared out the back window at the hole. The sheriff turned his head to the back, briefly noticing my gaze, then turned back to me. Okay, I'll be back later. Thanks for your help, Mr. He winced. Newman, Michael Newman. Of course, Mr. Newman, and he left. After a bit, I went to the back door and looked out. I couldn't see much, but now, with everyone gone, it seemed all the more creepy. Who was that person? Poor soul. How did he end up under that slab? When? And why? I decided to sand a bit on Connor's stool and headed to the garage. The deputy drove up just as I started out the front door. We stood on the sidewalk trying to avoid the heaved-up part of it, and he took my statement. The deputy's questions were a bit more detailed than I thought they should be. Is this your residence? What is your permanent address? Contact information? What do you do for a living? Retired? How long? When was the body discovered? Yeah, sure, not a body, so when were the bones discovered? Who was here at the time? Have you seen anyone suspicious in the neighborhood recently? Anything out of the ordinary? Either my patience was wearing thin or my anxiety was catching up to me, and I responded sarcastically. Oh, yeah, I saw someone come into the yard last night and put a skeleton under the slab of the concrete. Sir, I'm just doing my job, he shrugged. Then with an air of professionalism tinged with self-importance, he said, No, he announced, Mr. Newman, there is a protocol to be followed. At the time, I didn't notice the passive voice, but later would remember it. Got it. I was wondering what I would tell Jean. And Maxine, the thought only now occurred to me that she had lived here from 1949 to 2001. She probably knew the person under the slab. I got another chill. As I was pondering that possible conversation with Maxine, I noticed that 2 vehicles had pulled up. Turned out they were the KBI men, Kansas Bureau of Investigation. I was confused at first because the cars didn't fit the profile for law enforcement. Inspector Steve Barnes arrived from the Great Bend office in his brown Kia Optima, and forensics expert Robert Parton had come from Wichita in his red Ford F-150. Where were the black SUVs, I thought. "Stay here for a moment, Mr. Newman." The deputy motioned with his arm extended, palm toward me, as if he were directing traffic at a Friday night ball game. By the way, a Friday night ball game is the only time traffic needs to be directed in Morgan. At least somebody remembers my name, I thought as he walked to the agents. The deputy led the two around the garage on the west to the back of the house. I went back in, stood in the kitchen, and watched. They stood over the trench for a minute, talking and looking. Cell phones came out. Calls were made. Parton returned to his truck and retrieved a large toolkit. By the time he came back around the garage, I could see he was putting on latex gloves. He climbed into the hole much like Stearns had done, bracing himself against the sod on the south. I couldn't quite tell, but he appeared to be removing dirt from around the skull and arm. He moved to the right of the skull as I saw it, and he started poking at the dirt. I could see from the kitchen that he was digging fairly aggressively into the area where the right arm should be. He straightened and looked for a minute at the pile of dirt left by the backhoe's first couple of loads. He swiveled his legs to the right and, propping himself with his right hand, lifted his body out of the hole. At this point he looked up to the kitchen door, saw me, nodded, and smiled. I waved my hand and grinned like a complete idiot. He thinks I'm an asshole for sure, I thought. Parton knelt and began gently combing through the dirt pile. What is he looking for? He sifted carefully through the pile that was about 3 feet high at its highest point. The entire time that he worked, Barnes, the one from Great Bend, was on the phone. Stern returned about 10 minutes later. The 4 men huddled, Stern, the deputy, and the 2 KBI men. Stern and the deputy talked briefly. Then the deputy got into his car and left. Odd, I thought as he left. The sheriff's department vehicles are labeled with letters 18 inches high, Sheriff, Morgan County, while the KBI cars were unmarked and plain. There was a knock at the back door. I nodded and Stern came back in. "Mr. Newman." Yay, he got it right this time. "I just wanted to fill you in on what's going to happen." Okay, I couldn't wait to hear. "The men from the KBI will be in charge. Agent Parton from Wichita is a forensics guy. He'll supervise the extraction of the bones. We have reached out to a number of universities who have forensic archaeology programs to see if we can get some extra manpower here to help. It's probably going to take a while from what I know of it, which isn't much. The closest program is at Arkansas State in Jonesboro. Their team can't be here until tomorrow, but the man that runs that show says that there's a teacher, a professor, I guess, at Kansas State in Manhattan that has expertise. We are tracking him down. He might be here sometime this afternoon. So it may get a bit crowded out there for a few days. They will need access to a bathroom and drinking water. Is that okay?" "Certainly." I was glad we had at least one bathroom that worked. He went on. "Agent Barnes from the Great Bend office will log in and catalog evidence as they discover it. He won't need to be in the house, but he'll need electricity. Can he run a cord in here for that?" he said, making a general gesture to the kitchen area. "Oh, yeah." I would have to warn him about the temperamental fuses and the outlets that sparked. "That's about it for now." He seemed to be working from a checklist in his mind. "I'm sure sorry about the inconvenience." "No problem. I'm retired. What else have I got to do?" "Retired," he nodded. "So you said you live in Texas? What part?" We spoke back and forth for what seemed like 15 minutes or so. He knew Texas since he had attended the university in Austin. He also knew Denton, where I taught or had taught. We went through the usual questions that revealed that I grew up in Morgan, that my parents had been teachers at the high school, that my wife and I had graduated in the same class, that the house we were now in was her home, and that my mother-in-law, who was still alive, had lived in the house since 1949, and that I taught music. Music? What instrument did or do you play? It was not an uncommon question. Trumpet mainly, some piano. Stern smiled. That's cool. I played the trumpet in junior high, gave it up in high school. Never very good. It's interesting to me that so many people do music in their early schooling, but few stick with it. Maybe they were smarter than me. Sheriff, you could pick it up again. I like to remind adults that it's never too late to relearn music. Very few ever take that advice. Nah, too busy with this job. Then he seemed to double back slowly to an earlier point in the conversation. You say your mother-in-law lived here from 1949? Then nodding toward the back of the house. When was that slab put in? Not sure. I wanted to ask Maxine the same question. I was on the phone with Jean when the van from K-State arrived. You couldn't miss it. It was purple. Bones? Jean almost giggled. Is this a joke? I don't like it when you fool around. Bones? Like a skeleton? Yes. I hadn't told her about the bullet hole and probably wouldn't. Not yet, at least. It was under the slab. Jimmy, you know the man fixing the second bath, the little bath, correcting myself before she did, he and his friend were removing the dirt when they found part of a hand. What? She whispered, a long pause. Oh, my God. Who is it? What happened? She now knew I wasn't kidding. I explained the situation, describing it in detail, who had been at the house and who was there now and what the plan would be. Do you need to come home? A question, then a stern request. Michael, you need to come home. Are you kidding? I'm not going to miss this. I was actually more excited than I had been in years. I watched as the four from Manhattan, all wearing masks, listened to Parton's instruction. 3 were obviously students, 2 young men and 1 young woman. They looked a bit too young to be involved in what might be a grisly and gruesome job, but they were excited. It could be hard to see emotions with masks on, but I could see their eyes widen, foreheads wrinkle, eyebrows arch as they listened to the agent. They were cranked. The 4th, slightly older, but not by much, was obviously the professor. Most of the conversation was between him and Parton. As I talked to Jean, I watched them return to the van and extract numerous large travel cases, what rock bands would call road cases, and 2 or maybe 3 folding tables. They proceeded to the backyard and began unpacking. What's your mom doing? I asked Jean. She's in her room reading. Shall we tell her about the bones? Jean sounded worried. No, not yet. But go back and put her on speaker. A pause. Hi, Maxine. Well, hi, Mike. We miss you. Are you getting things fixed up there? Hope you can play some golf. Yeah, we're making good progress. If she only knew. Now, how to bring this up? So, we have cut through the concrete slab outside the second bath, the little bath, so we can replace the sewer line. Say, Maxine, I tried to be casual. When was that slab put in? It was there when we moved in. It's always been there, I guess. Okay, that's what I thought. I was relieved. Put Jean back on, okay? See you soon. Jean walked to the kitchen, and she turned the phone off speaker. Michael, I'm worried about you. What's to worry about? It's only some bones. It's an adventure, I thought. My mind raced with questions. Look, I'll call every couple of hours to fill you in. Meanwhile, I think they need to talk with me. I love you. Don't worry. I'm a big boy. I love you too. Be safe. Wear a mask. And then she hung up. Barnes was at the back door now with an extension cord in his hand. I'm Agent Barnes, Kansas Bureau of Investigation. Need to plug this in. Sure, right here. I unplugged the microwave from the socket just inside the door and plugged his cord in. Sparks flew from the outlet holes for just a bit. Hope this doesn't blow the breaker, I thought. Out loud to Barnes, I may have to unplug you to use the microwave. As I said it, I was still looking at the socket that was scorched from the sparks. When I turned back, he was halfway to a tent he had set up near the back fence. Command Center for Cataloging Evidence, I thought. Wow, my backyard has crime scene evidence. What a strange day this has become. Chapter 4, The Well Pit. Agent Parton and the four from Manhattan worked slowly and methodically throughout the day. I tried to keep busy with other projects. I checked my email, nothing important. One of the most difficult things in transitioning to retired life for me was the change in email. As an academic, fancy word for a college teacher, who always taught an overload, email was the beast that I could never fully tame. Once email became the norm, it had no respect for the workday or the weekend. Each morning it was the first thing to check, that is, after coffee, and the last thing to check before going to bed. Notices from chairs or requests from colleagues were often posted in the wee hours. The question in my mind was, who's staying up too late? Or who's getting up too early? Each morning my pre-retirement email brought 2 or 3 fires to be put out, or at the very least embers that could burst into flames if not attended to. Typically there were messages from students posted at some godforsaken hour explaining why they would be too sick to attend class. I usually assumed they'd just come home from a party and realized there was homework due the next morning. Often there were requests at dawn from junior faculty needing a sub for their 8 a.m. class so they could take a sick child to the doctor. If the beast was not monitored every hour or so, you could get hopelessly behind. Bad enough were the motivational missives from upper administration about how great we all were at our jobs, even though once again there was no money for raises. The worst were the announcements from some dean or another about a new addition to the incomprehensibly bloated layers of administration. 9 out of 10 times it was someone who had once been in the classroom but had been drawn to the dark side of administration for more salary. The fact that I usually characterize that move as losing one's soul is probably more a window into my personal resentments than reality. So email in my retirement has been a daily disappointment. Don't get me wrong, there was plenty of it. Politicians wanting money, political parties wanting money, Amazon wanting me to buy something that somehow they know I want, people wanting me to fill out surveys that only lead to someone strong-arming me into donating, you guessed it, my money. No, I cannot even donate $1, I would yell at the screen. Where's the button to let me submit without donating? It reminded me of a time not too long ago when waitstaff would inquire, is everything great? Isn't that a yes or no question, I would think? What about a few more options like pretty good, not bad, it's okay? Feeling ornery, once I scrunched up my face in a grimace and blurted out, "This is horrible, the worst ever." Then smiled and in a friendly tone said, "It's pretty good." I got a laugh from the table and the waitress, but I don't think I got my point across. However, I haven't gotten "is everything great" lately, so maybe someone yanked the right chain of the right person. I digress. See? Short attention span. So I checked email, looked at some headlines on the CNN site, but had trouble not thinking about the skeleton just 15 feet away. I heard the sound of a very loud power tool, and with curiosity getting the best of me, went out the back to see what progress was being made. One of the young men from Kansas State was cutting the slab with a concrete saw. Everyone near him had goggles, ear protection, and fancy respirator masks. The masks were the kind you use when working with lead, asbestos, or chemicals with noxious fumes. I wondered to myself how and when they got them. There wasn't a store within 100 miles that had them in stock. Due to the virus, I had tried. Did I mention that 3 Lakeview Drive has asbestos siding? Yet another project. It was good to see that they had the masks since the saw was kicking up quite a bit of dust. Why don't they water it down, I thought, but then I saw in my mind them pulling a skeleton out of a muddy hole. Agent Parton stood close behind the cutter, who was the biggest of the students from Manhattan, and was yelling instructions, inaudible to me when the saw was engaged. It was loud, and I moved toward the tent where Barnes had set up a command center. At least, that's what I was calling it, the Crime Scene Command Center. To be accurate, it was a canopy pop-up tent with wall panel. Home Depot has them for $165. It's just a frame with 4 legs over which the canopy is stretched. One side has a wall, and Agent Barnes had positioned that on the north. It was a hot but calm day with no wind to speak of. If the wind did kick up, he would regret his decision. Prevailing winds at the lake would come from the south. Once those south winds start, they don't let up. I watched the cutting and moved kind of sideways to the edge of Barnes' temporary office. I noticed that the other 3 from the university were at the pile left by the backhoe. They each had a tray that appeared to be a sifting apparatus. They were scooping up dirt into their trays, walking a few feet to the east, and then shaking the tray over what was becoming a sifted pile of dirt. I didn't want to be too obvious, but I was curious as to the role the agent from Great Bend would play. Great Bend, I thought? Who knew the KBI had an office in Great Bend? I'm not even sure Great Bend has a McDonald's. Certainly not a Chick-fil-A. In this part of the country, you could tell the status of a town by its fast food. At the bottom were Dairy Queens, Pizza Huts, and Subways. Even Morgan had those in the past. The next level up was Sonic's and Taco Bell's. Brahms and Wendy's came next, but at the top were McDonald's and Chick-fil-A. If your town was gaining fast food, the outlook was rosy. If they were moving out, it was a bad sign. Morgan only had a Subway. Wow. What were we talking about? Oh yeah, Barnes. The agent from Great Bend was typing on his laptop as I approached. He didn't look up. Next to the laptop was a pile of plastic Ziploc bags and a small printer. Above that, on a table to his left, was a plastic Tupperware box. I could see that there were 3 sealed bags in the box already, but I couldn't tell what was in them. "Care if I sit down here for a while?" I asked. "No problem," he said, not looking away from his typing. I went to get the camp chair that I'd been sitting in when the sheriff had arrived, and found a spot just outside the tent, but in the shade. A grasshopper jumped on my bare ankle, and I swatted it away. The girl from the university, her name was Darcy, I later learned, had carried her tray to the tent, and now Barnes was removing from it 3 small objects. He placed them in a baggie. "Great work," he told the girl. He set the baggie to his right and began typing. I had trouble at first seeing what was in the bag, but when he picked it up and held it to the sky to see it better, I could tell right away. Pearl snaps from a cowboy shirt. I almost said it out loud, but caught myself. It was about 12:30. Stern's deputy showed up with food from the local subway around 1 and then left. Parton and Barnes sat under the tent in camp chairs eating their lunch. The university crew ate in the van parked in the driveway. After a while they left, probably finding a restroom. Didn't Stern say they could use the one in the house? I walked over to the slab, being careful to telegraph to the agents with my body language that I wasn't going to disturb anything. As I turned to walk back, Barnes caught my eye and, raising an empty sandwich wrap in one hand and a drink in the other, asked, "Trash?" I brought the wastebasket from the kitchen to the backyard. "Can we keep it here?" Barnes asked, pointing to the corner of the tent. "Of course," I said. "Anything else you need?" Parton smiled. "Bathroom?" Through the kitchen, then to the right. I started to wonder how many words I might get from Barnes and Parton before this investigation was over. Wow, this is a crime scene investigation, a CSI. CSI Morgan County. Sounds kind of dumb, I thought. The morning had been a bit slow, but about 1:45 the van returned, work resumed, and things started to get a bit more interesting. The 3 sifters made numerous trips to the Barnes tent. I strolled around outside for a time, then watched at the window. Looked to me like they found bits of glass, metal objects, and more pearl snaps. The real excitement came about 4 p.m. after all the concrete had been carved up into small squares. Parton directed the sifters to stop their work and help carefully move the squares to the grass behind the slab and the back fence. They were placing them upside down and assembling them like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. When completed, the university crew stood in a line and looked at what had been revealed now that the slab was removed. Within a second or two, Parton pushed through with Barnes at his side and began taking photographs with a very large, official, and expensive-looking camera. The student who had been the slab cutter was the first to bring out his phone and start clicking. "No, no, no." Barnes was waving both hands. "Erase, please." He grabbed the slab cutter's phone and examined it to make sure nothing had been documented. While Parton photographed, they all stared down at the hole. From inside, I couldn't see very well, so I slipped out the back. No one noticed until the screen door creaked. Heads turned to me for only an instant. What was below them was far more interesting. You could not yet see the entire skeleton. Much of it was still cased in dirt. Some bones protruded up. The right side of the skull was now almost entirely visible. The ribs, hip bone, knee, calf bones, and heel on the right side of the corpse could not be mistaken. It was hard to judge the height of the person, but to me it seemed slightly less than average, maybe 5'7" or 5'8". I stared for a long time. Who? Why? When? The feeling that came over me was something I'd never felt before. You get a chill in a scary movie. You grieve when you think about a loved one who has passed. You feel fear when you sense danger. All of those were mixed together somehow, and I couldn't quite tell why. I didn't know this person. How could I grieve? Yet someone had grieved for him, or even, worse, worried, not knowing what had become of him. I caught myself. What if it's a woman? The thought only made it worse. I made a conscious effort to attempt to observe more than imagine. I and the college crew were so intent on examining the skeleton that we hadn't noticed that Parton had moved to the concrete jigsaw puzzle in the back and was frantically taking photos from various angles. He was excited. We moved toward him in a swarm, forgetting any pretext of social distancing. I wasn't sure what we were seeing. Parton stood up, put the camera down, and turned to the swarm. "Get your brushes out." He pulled out his cell phone, and after about 20 seconds, "Parton here. Sheriff, you need to get out here and see this." He hung up and looked at the crew. "Okay, carefully use your brushes to remove the dirt." He bent back down and in the corner of the jigsaw started brushing in short strokes, like this. They all picked a spot and began working. For some reason, he looked at me and started talking. I was hoping we might get lucky, and we did. "You see this poor guy?" motioning to the hole. He wasn't buried, then concrete put on the grave. And he wasn't buried in the concrete. He was thrown in a shallow hole and the concrete poured over him. I suspect, just guessing, that the area was prepped with forms like you use to make a sidewalk. Then, judging by the look of the hole in his skull, he was shot, and they, whoever they were, poured the concrete over the top. Then softer, I suppose, just thinking out loud, "This is so fucking great." He caught himself and looked at Darcy. "Excuse me, ma'am. I mean, miss." I am not sure why he had directed his explanation at me. Perhaps he assumed everyone else in the crew understood what they were seeing. It made me feel good to be in the loop. Parton continued. "So everything over time will decompose, but the bones and any metal or glass we might find. The concrete will have set around the corpse and his clothing, his shoes." He paused, looked at the north end of the jigsaw. "Boots. This poor bugger was wearing boots. Yeah. The concrete will set around the body, and if the conditions are just right, we get a fossil imprint of the victim." Once again to himself, "This is so cool." Parton stood up and started to walk around as a team worked. "Yeah, boots for sure. There's where the belt was. See the belt loops? Jeans. Wow. This guy was a cowboy." The sheriff arrived. It was about 6:30 p.m. Parton and Stearns moved to Barnes's tent, and the three of them talked for a good bit. I leaned over the brushers and strained to see anything I could discern. Then I felt a tap on my shoulder. I was directed into the kitchen by the sheriff and the 2 KBI agents. Parton, Barnes, and the sheriff explained to me carefully what would happen next. Barnes did the talking. "We need to shut things down and secure the area. Everyone is tired and we will lose the daylight in an hour. We will resume in the morning at 7. That's sunup. Should be enough light. We will add 2 tents to secure the area, one for the hole and another for the slab. We'll set motion sensors to detect any intrusion and put up some lights and a camera that will record anything or anybody that comes into the area. The lights should scare away any wildlife. Whatever you do, Mr. Newman, do not go into the backyard until we return in the morning, or you will set off the alarms. Here are our cell numbers in case there is a problem." He handed me 2 cards. "The sheriff has arranged lodging for us and the university team at the Durant Hotel in town. Any questions?" "No, none that I can think of." Things had accelerated so fast that I wasn't exactly thinking straight. I actually did have questions, many questions, but they would keep. "Okay, that's great. See you in the morning. Thanks for your cooperation." Then Barnes and Parton went out the back, I assumed to get the team organized. Stern hung back. You gonna be okay here? I'm sure it feels a bit strange. He looked out the back at the team that was now installing the tents. I'm sure Angela at the Durant can arrange a room for you if you want. Oh no, it's fine. I'll be fine. Okay. You got the numbers. And then he was gone. Jean and I talked for about an hour while I had 2 beers and made a good dent in a bottle of cheap red blend. I usually slept in the TV room, but the windows were just adjacent to the slab, or what now was a hole with the skeleton of a murder victim in it, so I opted to move to the front bedroom, the one farthest away from the scene of the crime. I admit that as I just typed that last sentence, it was fun to write. Scene of the crime. The light from the tent streamed into the kitchen, so I shut the door and eventually drifted off, listening to a podcast on my phone. It was about 11 p.m. I don't know exactly what time it was when I heard the clunk of the back door. I may have been asleep for hours or only minutes. I got up and the room was black. There was no moon. I stood up and flipped the light switch by the door. No lights. Strange. I searched in the dark with my hands from my jeans and pulled them on quickly. I opened the door expecting to be blinded by the light from the tents, but the house was just as dark as the bedroom. I was afraid of setting off the motion sensors, so I didn't turn on any lights, but instead tried to feel my way to the back door. I moved through the kitchen carefully, feeling first the counter on the left, then the stove on the right. I was almost to the back door when a hand grabbed me by the shoulder of my T-shirt and spun me around. I was too stunned to react. Then I felt 2 hands pushing me back and down. I hit the floor hard, first with my shoulders, then with my head. You do see stars, I almost laughed. I heard breathing in the dense blackness. Why is it so damn dark in here, I thought, as I sat up and began scooting toward the back door to get away from the breathing. Now the hands grabbed my ankles and began pulling me back through the kitchen. I kicked hard and got 1 foot free. I yelled, "Who the hell are you? What are you doing?" The breathing got more intense, and then there were 2 hands on the one leg while I kicked wildly at the air with the other. Who? Why? I thought. He was strong. I was being pulled into the hall. My hands grabbed at the door frame, but he was too strong for me. I kicked with all my might, but my motion only forced me to lose my grip on the door frame. He, or they, pulled me down the hallway. I couldn't really tell if there were 2 hands pulling me or 4. I scratched at the molding of the wall. I tried to twist and get a grip on the carpet. I heard the door to the utility room open and slam against the wall. 2 hands held my legs down. I reached into the air above me just as 2 more hands gripped my shoulders. I reached out to push back, but before I could do anything to save myself, I realized that I'd been pulled onto a sheet and I was somehow being wrapped in it. All of a sudden, it was tied around my torso and my arms could not move. A second later, it was constricting my legs. I was cocooned and now being stood upright by large, strong hands. "What are you doing?" I yelled. In the dark, I could smell the musty odor of the wood floor of the utility room. I realized I was being lowered through the trap door into the well pit as my thighs, then my hips, bumped against its edges. My feet hit the water quickly. It was cold. How could it be? This was bone dry just this morning. I had pumped it out. It was my triumph. The sump pump, the wet dry vac, and the well cap all went through my mind. Where did this water come from? It was now up to my chest, cold, very cold. Strong hands were on my shoulders and head, pushing me down and under. I struggled against the sheet. Too tight, I thought. I kicked my sheet-wrapped legs and imagined that I must look like a mermaid. Now a single hand was on my head, and I felt the cold water close around my mouth. Then my nose. I held my breath. I tried to kick off the bottom so I could at least get my head above water. I couldn't find the bottom. I kicked and kicked. I screamed, "Where's the bottom? Where's the bottom?"